Welcome everyone to this webinar, Mindful Education, the Science of Attention in Learning Design. Thank you very much, Mickey. And Sam, can you also join us into this conversation for a few more minutes? First, I would like to say that I'm blown away by this presentation. It's amazing, how we didn't practice a lot, but we complemented each other. I mean, it's amazing. And, Sam, I would like to ask you, what is the key takeaway that you take from Mickey's presentation and then the other way around?
I'm biting my fingernails, Sam.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't know that one can pick a single key takeaway. The overarching umbrella is that we need to go back and rethink what education is all about. I'm a bit of a cynic because in the United States, schools were started to keep children out of the workforce 200 years ago. They weren't necessarily started because we felt there was a need for organized education. And that not so illustrious beginning has led us to where we are. And we still teach the way we did 100 years ago. And we've introduced technology into the classroom, but we use it like we use a textbook. We don't really use it in a way that one would expect. What Mickey is arguing for is the same thing that I am. And that is we need to go back and rethink what is education all about. And is it just the acquisition of as much knowledge as you can stuff into a child's head? Or is it the acquisition of critical thinking abilities to use that knowledge? I'd rather have a child with less knowledge, but better application than the other way around. And so we're simply arguing that when kids come into kindergarten, and I'll leave it there, perhaps instead of asking them, do you know your colors and shapes and letters, we ought to line them all up and give them a cookie and ask them not to eat the cookie and see who can wait long enough. Because the kids who can wait long enough have enough impulse control to begin the educational process. And the kids who eat the cookie immediately don't have that impulse control. And for me, again, attention is this bigger umbrella. It's just so people understand, when I talked about those 4 critical skills, that all really falls under attending, right? Impulse control, handling frustration, processing speed, attending to detail, all falls under that broad umbrella of attention.
What do you say, Mickey?
It's interesting because I know from reading your work, Sam, that you also believe very strongly that each of those dimensions, students can learn and grow skills in them as well. So your kindergartner that eats the cookie right off the bat, their early learning needs to be, the academics need to be coupled or perhaps even overshadowed by the other skills that they're going to need to be effective learners. I think we've all seen that young people pick these things up really quickly too, that it's not a linear one thing has to happen and then another thing has to happen. And I've been really intrigued by what students are capable of if they're have the opportunity to focus on things that actually interest them, as opposed to things that adults think they ought to know. And so I'm kind of more optimistic that the combination of technology, this idea of personalization of learning based on data, and the idea that this is all fungible, that it's all a mindset that can be grown and developed, means that even students who are in wildly different places on your dimensions can thrive in any kind of education setting and learn the knowledge that they need to be effective citizens, to have a happy life, to support their families, basically.
And Yaki, one of the most exciting things about education today is that we're finally beyond the 100 years of telling everyone that intelligence is about how much you know and how well you can write it down or recite it. And in fact, intelligence, this is what's so exciting about education. We now realize that intelligence is about critical thinking, and critical thinking can be modeled, can be shaped, can be taught. I'm not suggesting we're going to make Einsteins out of everyone, but the data is very clear. You teach children how to think critically, their grades go up, their relationships go up, they deal better with everyday life. And I think what we're arguing in this presentation is that even using those critical skills is dependent upon your attention, your processing speed, your ability to handle your impulses, and the efficiency with which you handle frustration. And all of those can be taught, and all of those can be acquired. Again, some kids are going to go further than others, but we need to be more mindful to teach it to all children and not assume they just obtain it by osmosis.
Mickey, you started, the one of the taglines of your presentation was 21st century. Okay. Now, there is this very interesting gentleman, Israeli, Sol Zinger, that is one of the authors of the book Israel Startup Nation. And I had the opportunity of having him as a speaker in all the 4 summits that I've done in Israel. And he has this argument that says 21st century skills is things that we needed to have also like 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
The only thing that we call them now 21st century skills is now because the education system realized that we need to teach them and we don't know how to do that. Now, if you actually, and I'd like to, and another phrase that is very, very popular in Israel, that what you learn out of school, not you learn at school. Now, I would like to connect this to what you mentioned about the Holy Grail, about personalization, and there is no vacuum in life, okay? And kids are smart as hell, okay? So very often they can create their own strategies of learning. Now, it could be that the strategy that they decided to adopt for learning is not necessarily the right strategy, but it's working for them. But if it's not the right strategy, then it's creating for them a lot of cognitive load. They need to put a lot of effort in order to fit into the system.
Right.
And I think that one of the benefits when we unfold and we discover what are the attention profiles of a specific kid, we can direct him into, let's say, much more streamlined learning strategies that that fit more his personal profile. Mm. And if we are doing just that, we are creating a change for life with this kid. And I would like to maybe conclude this conversation by saying that you cannot be in education if you're not optimistic.
Yeah, because otherwise it's a path to despair and destruction.
So, Michael, what do you have to say about that? I mean, are you also optimistic when you think with education?
Absolutely, and I have a question.
Sure.
Prior to the pandemic, diagnosing learning disorders in school was very challenging. I think the statistic was 1 counselor at the school per 700 students, right? You bring into the pandemic, and that has gotten worse, right? So I've always asked myself, as I'm out talking to schools, virtual, private, charter, international schools as well, there's a tremendous interest in something like Moksho. Including today, we've got several pilots in the making. But my question is when is the mass going to adopt a technology that is going to allow us to diagnose students properly instead of putting them into an IEP, which then leads them down a course of nowhere? And I say that because I had a middle school student who went into high school, was diagnosed with a learning disability, thrown into an IEP, and he was there for about 2 to 3 years. And I finally got a little frustrated and said, I need to understand this. I had to take him outside of the education institution to a clinic at the expense of $1,800 to find out that he didn't have ADHD, he was dyslexic, which there was a tool online for, and within the course of 12 months, he was back on par at reading level. But that didn't happen without my involvement at the expense of $1,800 outside of the education environment. So roll forward, we have now a brilliant technology. When is the mass going to adopt something like this where we can now address these students, diagnose them properly, and have the prescription left to the school who has a number of tools to use?
Well, I'd love
Let-
to jump in on this, but I'm not the expert. I'll let Sam finish. But I think
Let me just be
yeah,
a little
go for it.
controversial, Michael.
Huh.
When are we going to abandon a diagnostic pathological
That's a good thing.
system
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
rates people one way or the other? You know,
Yep.
as a neuropsychologist, I'm interested in your strengths more so than your weaknesses,
I
because it's
agree.
your assets that get you where you go when you transition into adult life. So I'd like us to abandon this whole system. If you understand the history of diagnoses, they were created to decide how to best help someone.
Mm-hmm.
But now they've been co-opted by third-party payers, by institutions,
Yeah.
as a way of supposedly identifying not the reason for your problem, that's what you're complaining about, but your eligibility to receive some kind of services that may or may not fit the need
Mhm.
of the problem. What we're arguing for, and I think we're all saying the same thing, is a better way of understanding, as Yaki likes to say, your brain. And when you think about Moxo, we're not using it because you could think of it in a pathological way. You could say, well, the child's low on attention, so we have to teach
Right.
him to pay attention. Or the child's high on impulsivity, we need to teach him how to not be impulsive. Here, we're just suggesting better understanding the pattern of how the brain is developing and providing educational experiences that fit that.
Mhm.
And this is a big promise for AI. If you look at AI-based reading programs, Mickey's probably more familiar, like MindPlay, they do just that. They try and find the child's patterns and track the child's progress. And I would argue we don't treat the diagnosis anyway. So what do we really need it for? What we need is an identification of strengths and weaknesses and a path to help the child acquire the knowledge they need to go and the critical thinking skills to go out
Mhm.
into the world.
And I think
I-
there's a huge, if I could just jump in there, I think there's a huge sort of professional development / confidence building that needs to
Mhm.
happen for just regular classroom teachers and educators, because for so long this stuff has been in the domain of the special education director and maybe the school counselor, but not necessarily in the hands of the day-to-day educator, because of this like medical model, right? You know, looking at at diagnosing huge problems that somebody else needs to solve. So to keep going down this path means that teachers need some additional skills for
Mhm.
understanding what to do with this data, and also the confidence to believe that they're not going to hurt a kid by taking this data and doing something with it. And that's I think the big leap, honestly.
Teachers
I'd like
spend
to-
Teachers spend a lot of their educational time being taught how to teach.
Mhm.
They spend very little of their time trying to understand how people learn. And we have this Stepford wife kind of a matrix view that every child is the same, every brain is the same, and every child with a diagnosis is the same. Keep in mind, these diagnoses are like Chinese restaurant menus, 2 from column A, 2 from column B. And the reading disorder diagnosis is based on a discrepancy of where you are from where someone thinks you should be for your age or for your grade. And maybe you're there because you've just had lousy teaching. And it hasn't fit how you learn best, or it hasn't. We need to get down to the why and not be so hell-bent on measuring the what, if that makes sense.
I'd like to, we need to also to be mindful of the time. So
Yeah.
I'd like to wrap this conversation maybe by something that, very, very inspired me, Sam, when I read your book, and we had a conversation about it, tenacity in children. That over there you kind of self-reflected upon yourself. You said you became like a sophisticated test machine. Give me 30 seconds. I look at the person. I immediately know his flaws. Okay, and then you wrote in that book, and I remember this very, very clearly, that it takes a lot of patience to move away from this habit and to try to look at the entire spectrum of the person, strengths and weaknesses, and not jump into conclusion. And I think that this is where we are trying to be. We don't want someone to misuse any tool just to categorize someone and say, okay, he's problematic, take him out to school. I don't want to use it. I don't want to have him on the class, etc. And the ability to look at each a student and understand the student better is something that I think, the holy grail of education. And this is where we expect teachers to have the empathy and the professionalism in order to look at the child more than just another a future worker of the society. So, Michael, I think that this is maybe the cue to hand over the reins to you.
Thank you,
and
sir.
over to the panel.
I appreciate it. Everyone, thank you so much. That was a brilliant conversation. My takeaway from that was I think everyone on the panel or in the webinar had the same belief. Pre-pandemic was challenging. Post-pandemic, even more challenging. So I appreciate that, everyone. My name is Michael Spencer from Global Expansion Strategies. I will be moderating a panel today of distinguished panelists coming from various walks of education. And so by ways of introduction,